categories, in essence, make up the almost $3 million increase. On the revenue side, the next page, I'm going to highlight 5 areas that pretty much account for the change. Revenues in total is up $2,032,000 or 6.94%. Real property tax items pretty much are pilots, as I've reported in the last financial update. That's actually down $40,000. Last year's or this year's budget for pilots was inflated because the tax rate went down due to the reassessments, and so now we're a little bit behind the 8 ball. So it's a decrease in taxes as a result, or the pilots' revenue as a result of that, because this year's technically overstated. Sale of property, that's vehicles, is down $25,000 or about 70%. E-rates up $50,000. We haven't budgeted for that in the past, so we're going to budget $50,000 for that. State aid is up $2,012,000 or 7.47%, and federal aid Medicaid is up $25,000 or 33.3%. Appropriated fund balance is a decrease of $114,000, and that's primarily in the employees retirement system reserve, because our expense is down by that $114,000. So the money we need for the reserve is down $114,000. And again, the tax levy's at 5.5 with the tax cap at 1.62. So next section would be the staffing and fringe. Let's see. Apologize, I did not forgot to make a copy of the staffing section for the screen. But overall, administration is up 2 positions. That's one assistant principal and a community schools coordinator. Teachers are up 9 positions. That's increasing our funding for federal ARPA, increase in student needs are about 3.46%, and support staff is up 10 positions. And again, just increase in the federal funds and district and student needs are an 8.26%. 21 full-time equivalent positions of an increase, or 5.30% at this point in time. Any questions on staffing? Oh, nutritional services staff is no change in that. That's not shown in the general fund budget because they are part of the school lunch fund budget, and it's a self-sustaining budget, so they're not shown in your budget book because it's not general fund. Okay. The next section is salary and benefits. You'll see a couple summary of like total salaries in your budget book, and I use this data to help prorate some of the benefits and things like that. So when you get to, I think the 3rd page in is what's on the screen with all the highlights. When I take the salaries, I allocate it as to capital, administration, and program, and then apply those percentages to the total budget for unemployment or health insurance, and then we are able to prorate the benefits accordingly versus person by person type thing. So this just is a worksheet that helps me do that in other areas of the budget. The next couple pages is the line by line of teachers and administrators. for instructional staff, history going back to 2015-16. And again, this is where I get the prorated, the numbers to put into that previous one. It breaks it out by how much is administration, how much is capital, how much is program, based on the budget codes. And then the next two pages are non-instructional, again from 2015-16 through the preliminary budget, 2022-23. And again, the second page of that one would be a prorated. Show the proration of what's administrative, what's capital, and what's program. In terms of employee benefits, employees' retirement system, we have $6,531,470 in salaries at this point in time that are ERS employees. And the budget for that is at 14%, is what's being used in the preliminary budget. The rate for tiers 3 and 4 is 13%. And then there's tiers 5 and 6. About half of our employees are in tiers 3 and 4, maybe a little bit less right now. So at this point in time, that's what's being budgeted there. TRS is our administrators and teachers, and the salaries is $19,909,000. The rate for that is 10.29%. That's an estimate provided by TRS in early February. And so the budget for that is $2,048,000. And then Social Security is the total salaries, instructional and non-instructional, of $26,440,000 times a 7.65%. Any questions on these benefits? Here's a chart of our tiers for ERS and TRS, dating back to 2013-14. And as you can see with ERS, more people now are in tiers 5 and 6 than in the past. And that is a more cost affordable plan, not only for the districts, but for New York State in general. Every time they start a new tier, generally the benefits change and it costs less for employer contribution. For teachers' retirement system, it doesn't matter what tier you're in. They just charge a flat rate, and next year's projection is 10.29%. But ERS, there's a different percentage for each tier, depending on what tier you're in. The next page is a history of the ERS tiers and what the rate it has been for Batavia City School District, or pretty much all school districts, or if you have whatever plan that you opt into as an employer. So you can see tiers 3 and 4 at 13%, tiers 5 next year is 11.1, and tier 6 is 8.2. Now it's also important to note that there's some overlap. It's not a fiscal, it is a fiscal year for New York State ERS, but their year goes April 1st through March 31st. So there's 3 months that overlap. So we would be paying 18.1% for 3 months, and then 13% for 9 months in a fiscal year as the employer contribution rate for tiers 3 and 4. So that's why we're at 14% versus the flat 13% to account for those 3 months difference. This is new this year. When Mr. Bishoping was here, we looked at our costs for ERS, and I put together this chart. We had the annual billing. I could only go back to 2012-13 to get information from New York State on that. What the annual billing amount was, how much was general fund, and how much was school lunch. And then I have some averages for all the years that are represented here, and then in 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, and 15-year increments. And then for our reserves, we have an ERS reserve. I use 5 years times the 5-year average is the goal to be fully funded with our ERS reserve. So that comes up to $3.9 million. If we were to fully fund that, the board agreed that yes, that would be the plan. And that would mean we'd have 5 years worth of reserves, if we ever needed it, set aside in that if we had to reduce general fund budget, that would help sustain us for 5 years. Trs rates, again, I track all the way back to 78, 79, or 45 years, and the 10-year average is 10.83%. And again, this doesn't matter what tier an employee's in, it's just a blended rate of 10.29% is the projection. And again, I do a 3-year, a 5-year, and a 10-year average. Initially, usually in November timeframe, they give us a range, and that range was anywhere from 10 to 10.5%. We are part of the Genesee County Workers' Compensation Plan, and this is a summary of the expenses dating back to 2005-06 school year. And this year's expense is shown in there because we make that payment in January, so I did have that number versus the budget number. So that was $118,000 this year. And again, this is general fund. And again, I show averages over 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, and 15 years. And again, when Mr. Bishoping was here, I took a look at the annual billing and broke it out going back to 06-07 school year, and broke it out into how much was paid by general fund, how much was paid by school lunch fund. In the first 5 years of this chart, there was Richmond Memorial Library was part of our billing. They have since gone out on their own, maybe part of this plan, but before that, that was all part of our general part of our expense. So general fund average over these years is about $152,700. The next slide is on unemployment insurance and our expense and our history. The last couple years have been minimal with the Federal CARES Act and stimulus funds. We actually were reimbursed last year. If you look at this slide from a year ago, I think we had about $35,000 that was expense. We got reimbursed for that, so it brought it down to nothing. Actually, we got reimbursed for, I think, even the year before, but that year was already in the books, and so that came in as refund of prior year's expense. But since we closed our books, that's what I have to show as our expense for 2019-20 of $26,000. But technically, because we got reimbursed from that, the last year we really had any expense was 17-18, where we had about $10,000. 19, but that's not really that significant in the $50 million budget. Any questions on unemployment or work? The high deductible health plan, and the 105H generally is for those that have a a PPO or PPO D2 health insurance plan with the district. Those that our high deductible plan get $1,500 if they're single and $3,000 if they're a family plan into the health savings account. So, and then we pay a small administrative fee of about $96 a year to run these plans, and so our budget is about $513,000 for this. Any questions on the HRA and HSA? Also show retirees when they retire from the district, if they have sick days, that gets converted into a health insurance sick bank. And that is generally we spend around $700,000 a year, so I put 40 people in every year, and at that $1,500 premium. The next line is the single and opt-outs for our health insurance. And again, same process, and single. Questions on or health medical expenses? Okay. The last page here in this section is it's all our history of our medical dating back to 2009-10. A few years ago, someone had asked that Okay, the next section is our different contracts. We have administrators. We have 17 administrators. I list them out on this page, and then down below what the budgets were. We added 2 positions. The overall increase is $206,000 for those 2 extra positions, and then the negotiated contract raises, or 11.35%. Teacher summaries next. Any questions on administrators? Okay. Teacher summary is next. Again, this goes back to show the budget since 14-15. We had changes of 9 positions, and overall, the teacher contract is going up $472,000, which is 2.89%. This reflects those 9 new positions, but it also reflects grants and stuff that are used to offset those positions and other positions, previous positions. So we're using more grants this year, funding existing and new positions for the 2.89% increase in salary for the teachers.
So those grants will compensate for that 472?
Those that's the net after the grants, the 472.
Okay.
Any questions on teachers?
I guess I'm just wondering what the reasons are for adding 3 social workers.
Well, we had 1, so we're adding 2 social workers. 1 is part of the My Brother's Keeper as a new grant. Mm-hmm. And the extended day grant is also paying half of that salary in addition to the My Brother's Keeper. The other social worker.
That was through ARPA.
Okay.
To monitor the need for that. It was for additional support for UPK in kindergarten at Jackson. So that person has been placed there initially, and then we're going to be monitoring over time where that person would need to be, and then looking at funding. So.
And is that a grant or is it?
ARPA's
Yes, it's already
ARPA
got my
development.
budget.
It's one of the COVID grants.
Okay. I already know about the members keeper. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure. Any other questions on teachers? Okay, the next section is teaching other. And we do have some adjustments here that I've kind of outlined. The first one.
Sorry, can we go back real quick?
Sure.
So we're down 1 full-time teacher K-6. Is that what this bottom?
Yeah, and John, when I was going through today, is double checking and prepping for this, technically we're up. I had, when I first did this, the budget's correct, but I had the in the wrong section, so technically we're up. I think total of, I'm moving 3, I think, over, so it would be a +2.
For K-6?
Yeah, and then that would come off of the 712.
Okay.
So I do apologize for
That's
that.
why I saw that we're up 4 for 7 and 12, but down for K-6.
Right.
So you said that's 2.
I think
2
there's,
2.
yeah.
Okay.
Staffing was the last thing that I needed to do today, and that was one of the adjustments that I found that I needed to make. But again, they were accounted for budgetary-wise, it's just they were in the wrong category.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, and the teaching other, we have some adjustments. Principal designee, we no longer need that. There wasn't a lot of money, but we do have an assistant principal at each location, so we don't need the principal designee. Extra stipend. The bus supervision, basically that has been transferred out from district paying via payroll to contracted out with STA. Long story about that is there was some duplication of time and payment. So we were paying people while they're still on the clock with the district previously. And so now we've outsourced that work to STA, and STA is hiring those employees to supervise the bus. The E-list and tutoring extended day is up 124,000. Basically, this is a result of hard to get subs, so our E-list is up. E-list is when teachers give up their planning time, we pay them a stipend for that. And since COVID, since last year, 2021 school year, Jackson and John Kennedy changed their days, and so now they're in period schedules, and so now those teachers are better able to E-list when we have sub shortages. So it helps us in our sub account, which is down 22,000 because we're spending less hiring subs, but it's been shifted over to the other. Any questions on teaching other?
So is that still, we're still up about 102,000, right?
Yes, yeah. Because we pay per period or per block with the E-list versus the sub being a full day or a half day. And those rates per period or per block are more, yeah.
Okay.
The E-list has been in place since I've been here, so about 20 years or more. And you know, when it was first put in, I don't think it was ever envisioned like it would fully take the place of the subs, but it's going that way. Okay, any other questions? Okay, next one is custodial. Again, I'm just showing the summary. You have the detail behind each one of these, and then in your budget, supplemental budget books, you have a little bit more detail. Custodial, only a $63,000 change. We've had some turnover. We have 2 independent contracts and 35 custodial staff. In the past, the school resource officer was budgeted here. We did move that out into contractual line item. So that net effect of raises and changes in staffing is a net $63,000 increase. With the last custodial contract, we added a cleaner position, which is just a little bit above minimum wage. So I think we have 5 or 6 cleaners now. They start as cleaners and then work into custodians and such. Saves us a little bit, short term anyway. I mean, if we need a building maintenance mechanic, we're going to hire a building maintenance mechanic, but between custodian and cleaner, there's some difference, but they can start as a cleaner first and then move in the custodian position. Any questions on custodial? right, clerical, this includes all our clerical staff, teacher aides, security aides, career resource specialists, computer lab aides, and our individual contracts. We have 7 individual contracts for, well, 1 vacant IT, 4 active IT, and then our treasurer and secretary superintendent. So 132 overall positions with the clerical and independents. That's up 10.82% or 412,000. It's important to note that at this point in time, the contract is not settled yet, so these are estimates where we think the contract is going to go. So between contract settlement and increase in staff, that's how we get to 10.82%. And again, some of the staff is funded by the ARPA grant too. Any questions on clerical aides? Okay, our extracurricular, or in our teacher's contract, it's called our Schedule C, and those are stipends, and usually the coaching positions or clubs and activities, music positions. We pretty much rolled everything over. There's most lines get a 1.5% increase. There's a change for athletics that I made it a 2% increase, but so hopefully that accounts for some of the change. But their pay is changing a little bit different than everybody else's. But you know, that's just everybody. We budget for everybody returning, and we always have turnover, so it's not really a big concern because we usually only spend about 90–95% of what is budgeted here. But the other main thing here is swimming came out because we're with Notre Dame and we're paying Notre Dame. So you'll see an overall decrease of 1.31%, but about $8,000 would be added back in if you were going to do that comparison. And then behind the summary sheet, you have all the detail of all the positions by sport or by music, by building, whether it's music, fine arts, or building other. Any questions? Okay, equipment. Okay, I did not take a screenshot of that because it's 2 pages, but it's an increase of $27,207 or 14.87%. I highlighted a couple areas in my notes. High school technology is increasing $15,000. That's due to enrollment doubling and has never been caught up in previous budgets, but we just have more kids in high school technology. So we need to put more resources there. Jackson and John Kennedy, they're each buying 15 dry erase tables, tables that the students can sit on and write on, and then they're like a whiteboard table, and then teacher or aide can erase so they can do their work on the table. That's about $8,500. And then John Kennedy, with adding the assistant principal position, we need about $2,000 for furniture for that assistant principal. Those are the main changes in the equipment account. Any questions on equipment? Okay. Contractual is our next item, and this includes contractual mileage, conferences, and postage. Overall increase of $87,000 or 11.2%. The school resource officer, as I previously mentioned, was moved from the payroll in the custodial to here, and that's a net increase of $65,000. We established a community schools budget line, and that's about $6,800, and music is increasing about $7,000. And part of that is they run some of their programs through the Boces enrichment COSER, and what the district pays 100% of that. However, we've asked the departments to pay 25%, and the district would cover the others, the other 75%. We pay 100% in a school year, and then we get some Boces aid. We get that the following year. So really, they're covering their 25% share. Before last year, some of the if it was instructional programs, schools and departments like this were charging the parents, $2, $5 to go on a field trip or to do this. We looked into that, and we're not supposed to do that. If it's instructional related, it's a budget and needs to be budgeted for. Parents can't be charged for something that is instructional. So we'll see some increases here because of that, like the music, but also in transportation. Now, if a club or activity is fundraising, then that's totally different. But if it's part of the instructional program, the class is going on, let's say third grade is going to Stokey Farms or whatever, they're going and the district's paying. We're not going to charge them, the parents and stuff. So you'll see a little bit of changes in the budget reflecting that. It's not a lot, but it does add to the overall cost. Not a whole lot of changes in mileage reimbursement, and conferences and postage are still the same. Any questions on contractual? Okay. Operations and maintenance is our next one. A decrease of overall $90,820, about $100,000 in equipment decrease. And this year we did a big major purchase of one universal tractor that replaced two tractors, and so we don't need that anymore. That was about a $90,000 purchase, so that came out, generally speaking. There are some minor increases in costs with inflation, and one of the concerns, especially now, is utilities. Do we have enough budgeted for utilities with the cost going up? And generally speaking, we should. We've always had surplus in here, so it's about, well, you could look at the history, but it's about, we budget about double what we need. So if the utilities double, we should be fine here. Any questions on operations and maintenance? Okay, interscholastic athletics. A couple changes here. Last year, our athletic trainer didn't renew their contract. They were getting out of the business. We did an RFP, a request for proposal. We have a new athletic trainer, and our costs went up significantly. The previous athletic trainer was a little bit more local. We had two options, a Buffalo option and a Rochester option, and now we pay for mileage a little bit more, and it just is, it was a big change for us, but we can't control when our provider was leaving the athletic training option. We do have some, again, some minor increases in costs with inflation. Overall, the 16-year average, I do this report that kind of summarizes where, how much we spend on athletics in next year's budget is about 1.22% of the budget, of the preliminary budget. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 1.36%. Our 16-year average is 1.22. So again, that's a budget number versus the actual number, but we get a lot of press for just over 1% of our budget. That's where a lot of things hit the newspaper, or sports and stuff. So just wanted to share that because it's just one of the we get a lot of bang for our buck here, I guess, in that aspect. The next slide shows the participation, and this is since 2008-9. I think it goes back even further, but I just pulled this page. And COVID affected the last 2 years. Last year we were at 46%, or 2 years ago 46%, 2021, last year, and then 51% in 1920. But normally it's around 55 or so percent. So these are students who participate at least one sport, grades 7 through 12. So we should see that start to change a year from now when we have this year's numbers. And then there's after that is the historical records of our different sports. Any questions on athletics? Okay. The next is our state-aided programs. Most of this it's called the Instructional Materials Aid and computer hardware. Instructional materials are library books, textbooks, and computer software. And then we have computer hardware. And basically, we get aided based on a formula per student times that formula. So, for example, textbooks, you'll see that textbooks is a little bit different than library and computer software. And the difference is with textbooks, it's only the private parochial students from Batavia that are in the private parochial versus with library books and computer software, it's all 100% of Notre Dame's students versus just Batavia students, for example. So that's the primary difference. Other than that, they take the same students. Okay, so, but basically, textbooks is, the calculation, I think it's $58.25 per student. That hasn't changed in 20 plus years. Same thing with the library books of only $6.25, and then software $14.98. Those rates haven't changed in a while, a number of years. And what we do is try to budget for 100% aid in this. Now this year's budget, we're a little light in this area. We're about $20,000 light. But if we don't need the expense, then why would we put it in there? But so I'm working with Dr. Corey on our instructional materials. If we have a need at year end this year, we're going to try to do the purchase at the end of June. That money will carry over as a purchase order, carry over, and that will hopefully fill that $20,000. So if we've maximized our aid this year, if we can delay some of the expenses to when we process it, next year we'll maximize our aid next year. Because it's based on when the expense occurs. So July expense will be okay here. And then our computer hardware, again, it's a formula driven. It's based on I believe it's our WADA percent, and that's the weighted resident weighted average daily attendance. State uses a lot of acronyms and things like that, but times a population times the rate of 2420. So again, it's all formula driven. And we try to, like I said, we try to maximize those. Last couple years of COVID and stuff, we weren't able to, which is fine. If we didn't have the expense, why spend it? But in a normal year, you know, it doesn't cost us anything directly. Any questions on state aided? Okay. Tuition, other schools. This is, there's two accounts here. One is regular ed and one's special ed. And generally speaking, the regular ed, both of them, they cover foster care students, but also the regular ed also covers charter school. We have 2 students that we're paying tuition to a charter school, the Tapestry School, Tapestry Charter School. And then the special ed also covers the students that are placed in outside placements per their IEP, and also foster care. And this was adjusted up by $315,000 because if you look at the last 2 years, full years, we're right around $900,000. So we've seen an increase here. So this would have come from other surplus areas in the budget. So we just decided to right size this and say, you know, this is our cost, $915,000. Any questions on tuition? Okay. Boces Services. So this one, we do have a significant increase. It's $816,000 or 13.25%. It's important to note that for most of these items, we're going to get Boces Aid on around 75%. Not always, though. If a service we belong to, you're limited by their payroll. The state limited it to $35,000. So if that teacher's teaching that course is $50,000, for example, the formula, you're not going to get 75%. You're only going to get 75% on that $35,000, and then you'll get 100% on the budgets, or 75% on the budgets. But there will be unaided expense with that if their staff is more than $35,000. So. But if it's technology, for example, we buy all our Chromebooks through there, well, there's no personnel costs, so we're going to get 75% back. So we get around 75% back with that adjustment for employees, the Boces that make more than $35,000. So we this year. We've seen Western New York PTAC increase. It was around 5 students when it first started. Last couple of years, it's been at 16 students. This year, we added the Instructional Support Center back. So that's a significant increase to the budget. We're not sure exactly. We're one of the only schools in that this year. It kind of went away with COVID the last couple of years, and now it's was restarted. So we'll see what happens next year if more schools buy in. If they do, then our costs will go down. Still doing TIG, trauma, illness, and grief. Our alternative ed that was being phased out. Now it's reestablished in this year's budget. So that cost has increased the budget. That's almost $25,000 per student. That it increased significantly because they added a social worker to their alternative ed program. So when Boces, adds expenses, it just gets passed on. Our occupation occupational ed, career and tech, we see an increase in students there. And within the Boces budget, we're looking to hire 2 part-time instructional support specialists to help with instruction. Any questions on Boces? Okay. Next section is transportation. And here we see a significant increase too, 784,000 or about 39.5%. What we have budgeted here is back to our pre-COVID levels of, for STA, 21 buses. 20 we had before, and then we always carried an extra one just in case student need. An Attica bus, our contract for up to 15, so 15 are included in this. We've seen a significant increase in the number of foster care and McKinney-Vento students needing transportation, and then we go to Attica bus for those services. So there was a time this year when Attica told me, hey, you only got 1 bus left, so I need to make sure that I have enough buses budgeted because we're hitting that 14, 15 bus limit. But with STA, again, we went back to pre-COVID levels, and so what that is that Jackson would have had their own buses. John Kennedy would have had their own buses. The middle school had their own buses. High school, after 4 buses were done with Jackson, they swung around and picked up the high school in the afternoon. So they all had their own buses depending on tier. We were able to tier it that way. This year, with the lack of drivers from STA, you'll see Jackson and John Kennedy are together. Middle school and high school are together. And if you recall in the fall, there were a lot of concerns over, the length of time of the bus. We had Jackson kids being on the bus, so they'd leave Jackson, go to John Kennedy. By the time they get there, and all the kids, the first 2-3 weeks of school, it's slow with everybody. The kids are on the bus for an extra half an hour. So you have behavior issues and things like that. And last year we had the mask issues and the heat, and so we were dealing with a lot of issues there last fall. Again, after 2-3 weeks, kids get into a routine, things die down. Now there's no more masks on the bus as being mandated. So this is, if you want to stay where we are currently at the 15 buses, and again, assuming STA can hire drivers, we budgeted the 21, but if STA can't hire buses or hire drivers, we may still be stuck at 15. So we budgeted worst case scenario, financially, worst case scenario, but it's something that may be out of our control if STA cannot hire drivers. Last I checked about a month ago, when they hired one or somebody left, they were able to hire one. They haven't been able to get back up to the levels they were 2 years ago. So this is something that the board will need to consider. We're in our 3rd year of a 5-year extension with STA, so we have 2 more years with STA, and then we'll probably, unless they want to extend it, probably be bidding 2 years from now with that. I know there's a lot of changes, electronic buses and things like that. So it's just something, things will probably change and we'll probably need to bid it 2 years from now, but just something to consider as you evaluate the overall budget, and we're at 5.5%. Do we cut back here and stay where we're at and then save about $366,000 and cut that down, or look at other areas or seek a supermajority, 60%.
But with the reduced number of buses and the bus runs that you're running for this year, how do you generally feel it's going?
I think right now it's going okay. We've had some supervision issues here at the high school that we've had to, after school, because just the buses just can't, there's just timing issues. But overall, big picture, I think it's going fine. Again, after that first three weeks. But that's like that every year though, too.
So you're saying right now we're budgeting for 21, but right now we're paying for 15?
Correct.
So if we keep it at the 15, you said it's about 366
Right.
savings.
Savings?
Correct.
Okay.
Which remain, John, and that would really keep the current busing situation.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're looking to, I've got a couple quotes out there for transportation consultant. We're looking at, again, 2 years ago when Mr. Bishoping was here, we were starting to look at, hey, can we transport everybody? And what would that be? And basically it would be about, tentatively, it would be about the 15 buses. But we'd have to change our mileage requirements and we would have to tier them. So, doesn't matter which school, 2 schools would go earlier, and then we need like an hour, 45 minutes to an hour in between, and then they'd swing around and pick up the other schools. Kind of like what the Jackson 8 buses and then the 4 came around a second tier and picked up the high school. You need time in between in order to make that happen. But our initial thing 2 years ago is we could bus 100% of our students if we can tier the bus runs and then tier the start times. And it has other implications, like, we could get our athletics, out to Monroe County or wherever we need to travel at a good time versus getting there at 4:15, and, by the time buses end, we generally don't have, and it does affect athletics and stuff. But, there's contract issues that need to be resolved if that was going to happen.
So right now, we bus 100% of our students.
No,
You do not.
no, we bus about 55%. But tentatively, we could bus 100 if we could tier our times.
Yeah, right.
Right. And then you could budget the 15 buses versus the 20 buses and transport it. But we're going to hire a consultant to confirm all that and look at that, because I think that's something, transportation is sometimes a barrier for students, even though technically within the district city limits, we don't have to provide transportation per SED guidelines. We do. But that's years ago type things.
Busing is not mandated.
For a small city school within the city limits, it's not mandated. So, as I mentioned before, we're in our third year. Each year, the contracts can increase by CPI, and it's a different CPI than the budget CPI. It's a CPI that comes out in May, or at the end of May, so it comes out in June. But there's a summary of that. What I did for budget purposes is use the budget CPI, which was 4.7%. I had to use something. I'm not sure where they get the exact CPI for this. I know where they get the CPI for the budget, but I'm not sure what Bureau of Labor Statistics report they get for the transportation CPI. But basically, you can see here kind of summarizes where we are, what budget buses were budgeted for. The main thing here on this next page is our transportation fuel costs. Here you see what our fuel has been in prior years. I added this little chart to the lower right to just show a snapshot since about 2 years ago and we buy our fuel off of a bid, but February 3rd, 2020, it was $1.62. February 7th, 22 was $3.13, so it went up a significant amount, like 163% in 2 years, and it's still obviously going higher. So I budgeted $4 per gallon. I don't know if that's enough, but anyway, these are bid costs, so the taxes are taken out. So we don't pay, you know, what you and I pay at the pump, but it's still a significant cost. And if we go to 20 bus runs, now we've added more miles too, so it works against us here too. Any questions on transportation? Interfund transfers. Basically, no change here. We have two items for the most part. We have the transfer to special aid fund, and those are 12-month placements. We pay 20% and the state pays 80%. And I have this chart here of, you know, what we've paid over those years. And there's been a couple years where there's been some adjustments. And one year when there was an adjustment, we wrote off $150,000. That wasn't reimbursed. Must have been accounting. Something wasn't submitted correctly. I'm not sure, but there was a balance there that we said on our books that we were supposed to get money from the state and never did, type thing. And then, so that's $35,000, and then every year for the last few years, we've been budgeting for the capital outlay project. It's a $100,000 project. There's talk at the state to increase that up to $250,000. We get state aid, building aid the very next year, so it doesn't cost us much. So we've done, if you look at a summary of the capital projects since 2015, you can see all the capital projects we've done that were funded by general fund, whether they were capital reserve funds or capital outlay. It's interfund transfer, page 4. And so we still need to determine what next year's capital outlay project will be. We'll have to make that determination probably within a month, because we need to advertise in our budget newsletter what we're doing, so the public is aware of that if we keep this line in. I've asked the architect or our construction manager to work with our architects to give us 3 or 4 projects to choose from, so hopefully at our next Buildings and Grounds meeting we can make a determination on what we're going to look at to do.
If we do anything at all.
Right. So we could take it out, I mean, but we get $88,000 the next year, so I mean it costs us, to keep it in there, it costs us $12,000. Yep. Okay. Any questions on interfund transfers? Okay, we're going to skip the revenue tab and go behind that to debt service, and we'll come back for revenues. Sorry, it's a little out of order. That's the only one that's out of order. So, a summary of the debt service. Now, this includes 3 prior projects. One, the 2020 Vision project has not been permanently financed. We're finishing that up now with phase 2 of the project. We hopefully will be bidding that and opening bids in April. So we're on short-term borrowing. It's called a BAN, or a bond anticipation note. We really have to keep it as a bond anticipation note until all our expenses are known, and then we can go to permanent financing or serial bond. But this is just a summary, and you can see we have a projection in there for the bond anticipation note costs. The board will, this May or June, will be approving the band. We have to go out and bid that out, so we won't know the cost till about 3 months from now, 2.5, 3 months from now, but it'll be something, hopefully our projections are pretty accurate. But next year's budget is decreasing $1,367,000 compared to this year's budget for the debt service. Debt services, think of your home mortgage, right? You know, you have to pay principal and interest. This is our principal and interest on our capital funds that, our capital projects that have been done over the last 15 years or so. And you have a listing in your book, the first 3 pages. After this 4th page is kind of a summary of each of the projects and then the building aid associated with that. And then, I mean, it's within $20,000. We were able to reconcile to within $20,000 of what the state says. Couldn't figure out what that other $20,000 is, but it's close. State's saying we're getting more than what I was able to reconcile to, so I'm good with that. But the other thing that we've been tracking is our historical debt limit. And this goes back to 2005-06 school year. And I know it's really small print, but I circled items that I kind of wanted to highlight. And basically, if you look early on, we were spending more of our budget on our debt service as a percent of our budget. So when you look at, it says percentage of debt limit exhausted. On the top left, the 2 blue, we were over our debt limit in 2006, 7, and 7, 8. But since then, if you follow that line on the top and then you come back down, you can see we really stabilized, and now we're at 49, well, projected to be at 41.61, and we were over. We were 125% in 6, 7, and throughout the whole 20 years here or so, we've kind of reduced how much is needed that we're financing, and as percent of debt as a percent of the budget. So if you look at those, like I said, those 3 that I have kind of boxed in, you'll see that. So this year's outstanding debt service as a part of current year budget is 36%. Back in 06, 07, it was 119%. So we've been able to reduce, our long-term debt and liabilities as a percent of our budget. Any questions on debt service? All right, we doing good? Not too many lines in revenue, so if you go back one. Tab. Kind of talked about some of these already. So the first line, a decrease of $65,000. That's our payments in lieu of taxes. That's our pilots. As I mentioned, this year technically was overstated after the reval lowered the tax rate per thousand. So it shows as a decrease once we project next year's tax rate. And then apply the changes in percentages. So most businesses, they're 2 years off the roll, then 20% for 2 years, and 40% for 2 years, and 60 until they get to 100%. And then they come on the tax roll. So eventually, this number will go back down unless more and more businesses come in. which is fine. That means they go onto the tax roll, and then it will lower your tax rate per thousand. But this payment in lieu of taxes is alternative source of revenue until they get on the tax roll. Not much other changes there on that page, other than interest and penalties. We budgeted $100,000. In the past, it was $75,000. A few pages behind here, I have a historical snapshot, I think like 12 or 13 years, and I help look at that to help determine, you know, what is a reasonable amount to budget. So I feel pretty confident that $100,000 that will be fine for next year. In the area of sale of equipment, on page 2 of the revenues, next page, again, this year we turned in 2 pieces of equipment, and so we're not we have one less. We have a 2011 F-350 utility truck that we're going to sell. You know, it's a best guess estimate of $10,000. It's, you know, 10 years old, 11 years old. They are high, but we also may decide the purchases of new are high too. So we'll have to evaluate if it still makes sense to continue selling and trading in and then purchasing off New York State contract. I was talking to Jason DeGraff. He was like, he wasn't sure what he had budgeted was enough with the costs and things. I think he budgeted 50 grand. He thinks that maybe it might be 70 grand. So we have to analyze that a little bit more closer now, whether it makes sense to trade them in after a few years or just hold them until they you know, no longer are useful end of life. Miscellaneous E-rate, 50,000. Again, we traditionally have 50 or more, so we budgeted 50 there. And that's exclusive of special projects. If you recall, during the budget or the financial updates, I've mentioned that a couple years ago we did some projects special projects of E-rate over 2 consecutive years, and then we got funding for that. So if you take out those special projects, we're normally getting at least $50,000 in E-rate funding. Then we go into the state aid section, and I do have a summary, a few pages from here on what our state aid and reconciliation with what the governor executive output report. But overall, state aid is up $212,000. That's in the middle of the page 3 for revenues. And then our federal aid for Medicaid is up $25,000. And again, that's really based on looking at the history. Overall, then we have a slight adjustment for the debt service fund. Alison, when you were previously on the board, when I first started, we used to have that debt service fund. That's been replaced with the capital reserve fund, or capital reserve. And then, so this is cleaning, that's been depleted except for that $4,000, and that's taken in this year's budget, so there's no more money sitting in that debt service fund. And then the only other adjustment is in appropriated fund balance reserves. Our expense for employees' retirement system is down, so the amount of money we need from the reserve is down that $114,000. So this is one of the charts that I have a 13-year history that I kind of look at and chart to see you know, where our expenses have been, or our revenues have been over those 13 years. I added this chart here, which specifically looked at E-rate, state aid, Boces. So I broke out Boces basically, because I did make an adjustment to our Boces state revenue that went up a couple $100,000. Medicaid, other federal, and then part of the state aid is a tuition deduct. If you recall, I think on page 2 it's a minus $145,000, and basically that's it's tuition that the state deducts from our state aid that we would have paid. So a lot of times that's the McKinney-Vento or homeless aid that other districts get. We get it too, but they'll deduct it directly from us. It's the Batavia and Rome state schools for the blind and deaf, that we have students in there. State pays that tuition and they deduct it from us. So this I wanted to look at because it can fluctuate. It all just depends on, you know, what the student's tuition that's being deducted is. So I have $145,000 in there. The 3-year average is 105, but it's been as high as 137 in 16, 17, and 18, 19. So just the best guess in terms of that. State aid reconciliation. In your book, you have a portrait style output report. I didn't include it here because I had everything and my charts were all landscape. So, but I color coordinated the yellow, the green, and the blues, so you could see on your output report from the executive of, you know, what was released in July and then what adjustments need to happen. So for example, universal pre-K, it's shown on that report, but that's a grant. It's not part of general fund, so that comes off. So that's a negative adjustment to state aid. I took that tuition deduct of 145 off that we just spoke about, because that's not shown on that output report because they don't know what it's going to be. And then Boces, they had, in our budget, I have $3,050,000. It's close to our 3-year average. They had 3.5, so I took 524,000 off. So those are the adjustments I made. That brings us down to increase of 2012, $2,012,380, which agrees with the revenue summary sheets. Any questions on state aid? The board sees this every September timeframe when we look at our tax levy. I always show a history of what our tax levies have been and the change in the levy and the percent, and then what the averages are from 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, 15, and 18-year averages. So overall, worst case, the 18-year average, we're about a 1.56%. But since the last 10 years, we've only been at about 0.93% increase in our tax levies. So board's done a good job of controlling their costs and not taking, you know, as much need from the tax levies to the taxpayers. What's helped the last few years is after the GEA deductions that we had after the recession, that all has started coming back, and so we're seeing more state aid. Next section, any other questions on revenues? Okay. Don't think we need to review the district map. It's just in there for you. The next tab is, we had an enrollment projection study. I put the report in here. Basically, our younger, population is increasing and remaining steady, and our 7-12 is decreasing. So just a shift in where the students are going to be. And the consultant presented at the last board meeting. If you go to the last page of that before the hot pink divider, that kind of gives you a low range, a mid range, and a high range of where the projections are going to be. After that hot pink divider is the history of our dating back to 1976-77 of our student population. I did this last year, so I just updated it for this year, so you could see what the history has been. This is from New York State. I gave the website on there. This really, they had it in year by year, so we took each year and put it onto one master spreadsheet. Not that I could download, just this. So it did take a little work last year, but now that I have it, maintaining it, adding a year is not that bad. But it at least gives the board, the public, an idea of where we've been. And on the far right-hand side is how our schools are broken out, where Jackson, UPK to 1 and John Kennedy 2 to 4. So you can see if that was in effect 30 years ago or 40 years ago, what those numbers would have been like. The next thing is called the State of the District. We subscribe to a financial software package called Forecast 5. They do these random reports for us, and they gave me these a small city school peer comparison and a Genesee County school peer comparison. So the first one is just a second. The first one is the small city school comparison, but in here they start off with I only took a few slides. You have the full slide deck there from their report, but this is the percent of student money coming from local sources versus state sources, and on the left-hand side, and how we compare to the state. So local sources were at about 46%, and the state is about 61%. And then most of our money, a majority of our money comes from the state. 53-54%, where statewide it's about 38.5%. And then on the right-hand side is the average cost, or the average money per student. And again, you can see that local sources here is less, 21,000 per student, and statewide it's 25, and for local sources. This graph shows our fund balance compared to 7 other small city school districts. We're right about average. This is for the 2020 school year. Forecast 5 gets all the data from New York State, SED, whether it's financial data or instructional data. And so then they're able to present this information to districts so you can do your comparisons if you want. Operating expense per student, again, compared to the 7 others, we're right at the average of the small city schools. Teacher salary, compared to those, we're just slightly below for 2021, the average. ELA comparison for grades 3, 5, and 8. You can see in 3 and 8 we do well, and in 5 we're just below the average. Again, against those small cities, other small city schools. Math comparison, we do well in 3, are right at about average for 5, and below average for grade 8. Okay, and then fund balance as a percent of revenue, again, for these small city schools, we're below average compared to the other small city schools. Oh no, this is general, this is Genesee County. Operating expense per student with Genesee County, a little bit below average. Teacher salary, right at average. ELA, 3 and 5 are below, and 8 is above average. And then math, 3 is at average, and 5 and 8 is below.
Seems that you're doing this as a state of the district. There is a number about the ratio of teachers to students, correct?
In the report,
No,
Oh.
just generally?
generally,
I don't know if you know what it is, but there is an actual number.
That shows up in the school, report card. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know what it is right now, but that's what we find in the school report.
Okay, and out of these 9 positions that we're adding, how many of them are teacher positions, did we determine?
well, they're all part of the teacher contract, the 9 of them.
Mhm.
So are you talking about
Instructional?
instructional?
Mhm.
I'd have to get that information. I don't,
Well, I'm getting to the question.
okay.
If our enrollment is down, and yes, we did have a prediction from the gentleman that came and spoke to us, I'm wondering if our numbers are down, why are we adding more? Instructional or whatever, that's the question that comes to my mind.
Yeah, part of the ARPA funding was to, with the COVID, to catch kids up.
Yep.
So a lot of those extra supports, whether they be social and emotional support or mental support.
But is the district, maybe Dr. Corey can tell us this, is the district expecting that this will be a temporary kind of situation to bring our kids up to the levels they need to be over the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years? Or is this, because generally we have the idea that we add these, and unless there's some retirements, we stay at this level even though our numbers decrease.
Part of the funding is, we lose the funding after 3 years, so
Okay.
either they need to be absorbed in the general fund budget, or if replaced, maybe that position, someone retires and somebody slides into that
Mhm.
retired position. So, as the students are up to speed, ideally, we either have to have them part of the general fund budget or not type
Well,
thing.
I guess, I'm just feeling like once we get them in to the district, even though with enrollments decreasing, we never get and I'm not talking about anybody specific, I'm just saying, yes, we had a reduction in reading teachers, but generally,
Right?
I'm just saying, are we at the right levels that we should be, enrollment versus staff?
Yeah.
And I understand about the
Yeah.
grants and things like that, but.
We'll have to evaluate that, and I think we have to be strategic with our hires and resignations as we move forward, and you know, it's a comprehensive approach.
Okay.
We are, these are principal for a few weeks to ask them to like go through and staffing recommendations. If we're going to have reductions, we're going to have to consider those.
But this tax levy increase that you're asking for is a wish list.
Correct.
The board can actually say to you, we do not want any increase whatsoever.
Correct.
Okay. And therefore, that's where we will have to find.
Yeah, we'll be looking.
Money.
Yeah, we'll be looking for guidance probably at Thursday's board meeting, because we only have one meeting after to adopt the budget. So we really need to know what the board is feeling, so you can direct us, so we can.
Okay.
We have tentatively, between Scott and I, have identified some possible reductions.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, those are questions.
Not necessarily staff.
Yes,
But
sure.
we have gone through, just yesterday, I've gone through and identified some possible reductions.
Yes, because that would have been my question to you on Thursday. Where do you think we can make some reductions?
Sure.
I don't want to say cuts, I just say want to
All
make
right.
some reductions.
That ratio that you were referring to, that's just more something that's recommended, right?
Teacher.
Teacher.
Go with the teacher.
Because I understand where you're coming from, but I think we made some unnecessary cuts in the past, so I think we're only playing catch up to find a lot of these positions back in there. I think with COVID and the spot I think our students are at, I think that was something that's definitely needed.
Absolutely, with this ARPA and whatever, I can see that, but I just don't want to get to a point where we have more staffing than we need.
Right.
And also, without speaking for all of you, when Scott and I sat down and looked at the tax levy last week, as it stands now, it's at 5.5. We're obviously not going to, I would not recommend that they go out that high, or with a super majority, 60%. As I said, Scott and I have already identified some possible reductions, anticipating this exact conversation.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Next tab, any other questions on this report? Okay.
No, but thanks. This is a very interesting part of the budget.
Yeah.
Your numbers aren't interesting.
A little bit better graphics. All right, the next is the New York State Comptroller Fiscal Environmental Stress. There's information on how the stress scores are calculated. This is approximately 10 years old, where they started giving stress scores. I believe the first couple of years might have just been financial stress, and then I think they added environmental stress. I'm just going from memory here. But our averages is generally we do not have very much fiscal stress up until this point in time. And we've had some environmental stress, but basically not enough to make it rise to a level where there was a designation from the state. And the factors that they consider, it's on the second page here, like financial indicators would be your fund balance, your operating deficit, surplus, cash position, and reliance on short-term cash flow or debt. And then environmental indicators are percent of economically disadvantaged students, student-to-teacher ratio, teacher turnover rate, change in property value, budget vote approval rate, and percent of English language learners. So they take those factors into consideration when a New York State Comptroller does this report. Grant funding is the next tab, and I don't think I didn't do a chart on slide on that, but basically since 2005-06, you see a history, and we've received $37.5 million in grants in that period, and this year we're at almost 2 million. And then that's a summary on that first page, and then behind that is a breakdown of all the grants for those years and what the initial budget allocation was. That was just too small for me to put on this slide. Moody's, every year we get a credit rating from Moody's. For the last 11 years, we've been at A1 credit rating, which is slightly lower than the U.S. district median of capital A, small a3, but still pretty good. And then you have the report behind that, and that's for 2020. ESSA transparency. This came out, this is the third year reporting. We do 2 transparency reports, one for New York State and one for Feds. The Feds is the ESSA transparency. State uses budget to budget numbers. The federal uses actual expense numbers. Kim does this for me, or for the district. So she could speak more highly on this, but basically there's a district breakdown, and then there's a school breakdown. And really what the idea is to determine if there's equity within your schools, right? So we're a little bit different. We're well, not different than most schools in our area, but from larger schools where we're grade level. So before consolidation, this report might have been very helpful because we had 3 neighborhood schools, K-5. So this would have been you'd be able to compare Robert Morris to Jackson to John Kennedy to see is there equity between there. Now it's, grade level schools, so we can't really, the only thing we can compare to is other New York State schools or other, well, it's not a New York State report, this other national schools in those same areas. But one of the things I'll do for next year is I'll try to have the history, so at least you can see, okay, what Jackson has been in each one of these categories over those 4 years, so you can start to see the comparison how Jackson has changed over the years. And it's the same thing with district, high school, for each one of those 5 different ones. So I'll add to it. So at least there's some comparison, Batavia to Batavia, historical. Other than that, I don't see much value in this report, the way, for us. It's something that has just been required. Last thing in the green section here is our voting history. It's a 10-year voting history. 2020-21, if you recall, during COVID, it was 100% absentee ballots. So we had a spike in number of votes of, total votes is 2351. So when you look at this chart, and this chart comes from Erie 1 Boces, it shows that it was spiked at that point in time. Also, our percentage of yes votes through that was a lot less than traditional when people come out to vote. But generally, in this 10-year period, we go from excluding the absentee voting year, we've hit 457 as a minimum number of people voting, and 1136 is the maximum number of votes. Financial summary. Kim does a great job with these. It's really a lot of charts and graphs. Just kind of go through a random sample. You've got about 40 different pages or so. This is a breakdown of our revenue budget for next year, and it's very comparable to the next page where we do a comparison to a few years ago, like 2021, 17-18 and 14-15. It's more comparable to the first two, 2021 and 17-18. 14-15, we were still behind the 8 ball with the recession and the GEA state aid reduction. It was starting to come back, but you can see that the percent of money from state aid was a lot less, and so tax levy was, as a percent of the budget, was higher. This chart kind of shows the increase in the state and federal revenue history. The tax rate, there was a reassessment last year, nothing that the district can control, and you can see the drop in the tax rate. It went down about $2 per thousand. Our tax levy history, that's the only thing we can control, and you can see the previous 3 years we were in essence flat, and again this year is based on preliminary budget, so that's the 5.5% increase. On our expense side, we do the same chart and break it out into major categories that the state breaks it out into: general support, instructional support, transportation benefits, debt service, and interfund transfers. And you can see it's very similar, at least for the first year of 2021. The prior years, 2017-18 and 14-15, we still had debt service in the debt service fund, so it kind of is skewed for comparison purposes. There's our budget comparison, and you can see the increase over time. General fund payroll history, we had a number of years where it was pretty flat and slowly increasing, and then now increasing, and then it flattened out, and now it's increasing again. Again, the last 2 years there are budget numbers, so it's kind of skewed because not always do we spend 100% of the budget. Fringe benefit, actual expense, and again the last 2 years are budget or preliminary budget. Healthcare, the different healthcare lines that we have. As I mentioned before, Genesee Area Healthcare is increasing the premiums 12.5%. And utilities, and this is kind of goes to, we generally budget where we're at the last 2 years. There's no change, and this is where I said even if utilities double, we should be okay because those lines will go up higher, but there should be enough flexibility in the preliminary budget to account for that. If they go up 3 times as much, no, but then there's a bunch of other charts that just took some of the more not important ones, but the ones I thought maybe you'd be interested a little bit. The next section is a long-range plan, and again, Kim does this for the district, and takes our current budget and puts in estimates. So she put in estimates for tax levy increases of about 1.5%, state aid of about 2%, health insurance 8%, retirement systems TRS 12, ERS 15, salaries based on current contracts and what is anticipated, and then all other like equipment supplies about 2%. And I only have the first chart on here, but they all show this trend where you're here and then you slowly are using it. But you got to remember it's a worst case scenario. Assuming you're going to spend 100% of your budget and not, get 100% of your revenues. And you get 100% of your revenues, but you don't get any surpluses. So over the course of time, the further out you go, it does show a negative. This is always shown this way. We haven't been in a negative. It's just, it's part of the software. And so you can see what decisions you're making as a board and what potential the impact could be, at least 1 year out, right? Because the further out you go, the harder it is. And then, we don't know what state aid's gonna be. Yeah, it's good now. When we have those grants, but there could be that funding cliff that Alison talked about where the grants dry up, maybe there's no more state aid, increase in state aid, now what are you gonna do type thing. So all of them follow this, like worst case, it's budget to budget, and it's worst case. So, but history shows we're not there. We are, we're flush, but that's what the formula in the software shows type thing. So I only did the first chart. There's some good data in here that, like Kim and myself, would probably find kind of interesting. But it's good information, at least familiarize yourself with, like, if this were to happen. I know when we first started doing this, and it was right around and it wasn't this software, but it was a different, an Excel version, and it was right around consolidation, and it brought everybody, like everyone was getting all excited. We haven't had problems. It's part of that worst case scenario. Okay, reserves. I just have the chart on where, and I apologize for the small font, but it's like the second or third page from the back. But in this reserve section, there's a plan. It's like 8 to 10 pages, and I go through the summary of what the reserve is for, what the strategies are for the reserves that we have. Like before, I mentioned ERS reserve, and in here we should be shooting for 5 times our 5-year average. So that's why on that other ERS, I said, okay, it's 3.9 million. Well, we have about 3.1 million, so we're not fully funded if we use that 3.9 million estimate. Others, we are fully funded, unemployment being one of them, and not knowing that there were going to be federal bailouts, more money was put into there. That is a reserve that eventually can be utilized. It was utilized a few years ago to jumpstart the 2017 capital reserve, so you can transfer from reserve to reserve. There's certain restrictions depending on the reserve, or you could maybe even bring that in the general fund. So Alison, a few years from now, if we run in that funding cliff, you could use that reserve type thing. All that does, unless you make changes or get more state aid, is just delay the inevitable by a year. But there's options, I guess. But basically, this chart kind of lays out, I think, 11-year actual history and 2-year budget. The reserves we have before this is you'll see a history of the reserves and the activity over those years. Didn't think this one page summarizes it. Okay, what the June 30th balances were. But if you want to see the detail, you can go back to say, okay, what was unemployment, or what was, Okay. And any questions on reserves? And then in that other detail, there's, again, descriptions of the reserve, what the legal citations are, limitations and things like that. So if you're gonna make any changes or anything, you know, there's certain rules. You just can't make those changes. Some of them have to be voter approved, some of them just board authorized. So there's just certain things like that. And the last section is our tax cap. After the cover page for tax cap is the copy of the tax cap form that was submitted to New York State. And it shows that our maximum tax levy is $19,809,000. You know, when we submitted it, we were not planning on overriding the tax cap, so it was submitted that way. But what you see here on the screen is a few years ago, after the New York State Open Book New York State has this report where you can download the data to get you know, comparison into an Excel. I think you can do 6 years at a time. Then I've just updated it and added a year each year. But we use this to pretty much for the far right where we look at the averages, because the next slide I'm going to show you is our projection of the tax cap moving forward and what impact that has. But we want to know, you know, what is our growth factor, you know, and it's minimal, I know that, but at least I've got a 10-year average, and so we plug that in. It helps us with the long-range forecast of tax cap. But this is a historical view of the tax cap from 2013 to 2023. So again, one of the reports that Kim does, again with this Forecast 5 software, so this next page is our tax cap projections, and she plugs in the information we need to know. Like, we know what our debt service is, you know, based on, you know, that schedule that we currently have. I know we have the one that's a bond anticipation note, but we're using what we know at this point in time, or the estimates that we're using. We're using the estimates from the previous chart that I just showed and factor them in here, whether it's a CPI, whether it's the growth factor. So we can, you know, those are the estimated historical numbers for Batavia. You know, we know what our pilots, payments in lieu of taxes are based on our current schedule and how they play out the next 5 years. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into this, but a lot of the detail you have is what we're using and plugging into this tax cap calculator. Bottom line, it's at the very bottom, it shows next year $315,000, which is our 1.62%. The year after that, we can only increase, projected only increase taxes $541,000. Then 379, then 214, then 620. So about $500,000 each year, or less type thing, around the next 5 years is the maximum to stay within the cap. Again, projections, the further out you go, the less reliable. But we wanted to show you because, again, when you're making decisions, you need to know, you know, this is the most that you can get from the taxpayers without getting a supermajority. So there are factors outside your control, health insurance, retirement system rates, and things like that, that if they go through the roof, now, then you can only go up $300,000, $400,000 in taxes, then that means, okay, well, how do you balance it, or do you go for the supermajority? And I thought I had one more, but I think I missed it. But if you turn to the very last page of your book, this is, we did this last year for the first time, and this chart shows the cumulative effect of not going to the tax cap. So there's always a pressure, and I'm not saying it's not, that we should or shouldn't, I'm just saying there's always a pressure to say, you know, we're not going to increase taxes. Because we didn't do that since 2012-13, technically, the cumulative effect is 29 million point seven that we, you know, have saved the taxpayers, but that puts pressure on budgets. So if you would have had some of that, or I'm not saying all of that, you know, if you were to go back and say, oh, well, we could have, this just shows you if you went to the tax cap and you got the voter approval, you would have 29 million more within your budget type thing. And I'm not saying, that's just,
Yes.
so you know what the impact over time is, and really that's what this chart is showing. The other thing that was, that we showed in this chart is to the far right, there were 6 years where there were New York State tax rebate checks, and that was because we, or tax freeze checks, and that's because the district complied with the tax cap. $4.9 million directly went to the taxpayers when they got their rebate checks. So technically, the district over that 11-year period has saved our taxpayers $34.7 million, which is a great thing over this time period. So I thought this chart was powerful, but it's important to just really see, you know, how the impact, you know, it continues to snowball, I guess, if you know.
Are you trying to convince me?
No, I'm not trying to convince you. But decisions, you know, it's just something that you need to look at. Because if you're limited by your tax cap, by $500,000 moving forward, it all kind of plays in together. It's a part of a big picture.
Politically wise, you know, we often think of this as a 2% tax cap, right? And that's really not what it is, because it's different every year for the district. So like, if we're going to increase the tax levy, I mean, we can't go by 1.62% anyway. But if we could, it's always best to keep it less than 2, because that's what most people think of it now, is the 2% tax cap. In this particular case, I mean, there's years, like, you know, like in 2013, okay, like in 2014, 2015, the tax cap was 3.07. That year, we kept it at 1.99. That sounds good, it looks good, it feels good, right? So here we're kind of limited to, well, not kind of, we are limited to 1.62. The budget that Scott and I just walked you through, that Scott walked you through, there's room in here that Scott and I do the funds, what we're looking for. I don't think, what we want to hear is there interest in going to a super majority? 5.5. I would say no, right?
It would be hard.
It would be hard to do. So I mean, so that, but yes, and it's a mixed bag as far as districts having success with that. So the tax levy they're showing 5.5. We would not recommend that we try to exceed that. So if we want to get, if we want to go to the cap, 1.62. Scott and I have some room that we can come back to with as soon as Thursday with some additional recommendations.
I know this preliminary budget is always, you know, a wish list for everyone.
Right.
And, you know, that's how you prepare it. But that doesn't, you know, necessarily mean that's what we can afford.
Right.
We, you know, and we have room in the grants, we have room in some of the busing pieces that we just talked about as well, so.
Okay. Anyone else have anything to say? Nope. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I can't believe you got it all in 2 hours.
I can't either.
After being doing a three session one last time.
You really can do it, Scott.
Yeah. Well, as I said, if there's any questions, I know you just recently received the books. Don't hesitate to shoot an email or at Thursday's board meeting, you know, ask for more information or clarification.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.